On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 2017. We're going to be taking a look at John Mellencamp, and he's going to be performing Small Town. Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus, and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So, there's a link in the description below as always. If you guys want to watch this the whole way through without me interrupting it, because I'll probably jump in about halfway through. And there have been requests for different performances by John throughout his career, but we're looking at something that is a little bit more recent. So, let's have a look at this and see how John gets on.
Well, I was born in a small town and live in a small town. Brought down in a small town for the small community. And all my friends, it's a small town. My parents live in the same small town. My job is a small town. Provides a little opportunity. Educated in a small town, taught to fear Jesus in a small town. Used to daydream in that small town. Another boy, more man does me. I've seen it out in a small town. I myself a ball in a small town. And then that dollar brought to this small town. That small town, just like me. From where it is that I come from, and I forget the people who love me. I can be myself here in a small town, and people have to be just what I want to be. My baby, oh yeah, honey.
So I'm just going to jump in here as we get into the fiddle solo. This is one of those rare cases where we have an artist who is really well known in the USA, and I mean really well known, and hardly known at all here in the UK, and especially in England. And sometimes this happens where you'll have artists or bands that fall between the cracks of the industry. And it's certainly the case with John, because looking into his music and the fact that I think in the 80s he released 3 albums in the USA that went triple platinum back to back. So consecutively he had 3 albums that he released that went triple platinum. I mean, that's just crazy sales figures, and in the USA he sold about 30 million records, probably more than that now, and I think double that worldwide. So a huge artist in his own right, but then here in the UK and in England, we don't really know about him because, I mean, during that period in the 1980s, there's a song that he released called Jack and Diane, and that's his highest charting song ever here in the UK, and that's 1982. It got to number 25 here in the charts, and his biggest album, which was Big Daddy, again in this kind of 80s period, 1989, that got to number 25 here in the UK, and that's his most successful album. And if we look into it a little bit further, in the 80s, only 8 of his 25 released singles charted here in the UK. And when I say charted, I don't mean, you know, charted in the top 20 or the top 50. We're talking about the top 200. So only 8 of 25 of his single releases even made it to the top 200. So you can start to see why we don't really know much about John here in the UK, unfortunately. But there'll be obviously pockets of fans that do know about him and follow his music. So it was interesting for me looking at this performance as to why it maybe didn't resonate with people here in the UK. It might have been the fact that it has a lot of traditional elements. When we're talking about, rock music, I think this is described as heartland rock, something like that, which to my understanding is because it does really transport you back, or at least have elements of traditional music in there. When we're talking about traditional folk music, where you've got, the fiddle and, country music and all of these sounds that you would attribute to the origins of music in the USA, but also just folk music generally, having this kind of sound. But the thing that John did with it and has done with it is now start to apply those traditional sounds to a heavier sound of rock. And in this performance, it's a good example because we've got distortion on the guitars. Even though we're only playing chords here, you've got a heavier sound to the guitar work, but you've still got the fiddle solo, which we're going to be hearing when we get back into it. So it's a really interesting blend of instruments that you wouldn't necessarily get in the same genre. But that's the great thing about music. You can't really put anything in a particular genre. Even though people do, you can do exactly what you want to with music, and this is something that John's done. Bring in these other instruments. I saw actually in another live performance an accordion that's being played. So yeah, you get this really traditional sound with this kind of edge of rock to it. So for me, yeah, it's great. It's something that is a little bit different and really well executed, but it's just the case that we didn't really get a lot of this, or at least it didn't really pick up here in the UK. So the great thing about this song is just straightforward the whole time. And I mean that from a rhythm perspective. In the intro, we get the tom. I think it's the floor tom, the snare, and the tom is effectively acting like a hi-hat because it's really going to be driving things along. So that's a great introduction rhythmically, but then when you look at the guitar, if you do play guitar yourself and you're looking at the chord shapes going on here, you might notice how sometimes when you look at John especially, he's playing chord shapes, but they won't relate to standard tuning. So the other guitars, and by the way, we've got 3 guitars here, which is always a positive in my book, being a fan of having more than one guitar live. But anyway, having this capo on the 2nd fret, you'll see that on, I think, the other 2 guitars. John doesn't have the capo on there, but we'll try and explain exactly what's going on tuning-wise. And it's not going to be an instructional video, but I will just show you a way to kind of busk along to this.
Well, I was born in a small town and live in a small town.
So I'm just going to pause it there because you might be able to see on the screen, even though on your screen it's going to be a little bit smaller than normal, John is playing a D shape and he doesn't have a capo on his guitar. So it means that John's guitar must be tuned a couple of the notes higher, so a tone higher, in order for his chord down here to actually sound like it's up here. So I mean, it's a bit of a weird tuning thing going on, but then when we look at the capo, I think the other guys are going to be playing this G shape, and they kind of move that shape, the C shape down, and I think they then go over to a D. The other thing about this, if you wanted to play that riff, you could jump over to the D there, then you'd have to jump over to the C. The riff, for the most part, I'm playing the 2nd fret, the G there, and then just take that C shape. And if you want to really emphasize that riff that we've got going on, you want to pick out that G string, and then you want to focus on your D string, because that's really the melody that we're hearing. So by just picking out the strings, you start to hear the riff a little bit more clearly. I think I saw them going over to the D, but if you wanted to, you can slide back up again. Kind of like that, getting back into the G. And I'm saying a G shape here. I know we've got a cap on the 2nd fret, but if you know your G chord shape, then you'll be able to jump straight into this. And same with the C. Just sliding it down. If you want to play it that way, then it's fine. You've got this blend of guitars where you want different things to be going on rather than everyone just playing the same thing, because then you might as well just have one guitar. So yeah, we've got a great blend of guitars here because it's not too much. You might think that having 3 guitars would be too much, but you could also say that there are never too many guitars, but there can be when they're not organized, or you know, when they haven't been arranged properly. And what I mean by that is playing different chord voicings, so that you might have one guitar that's playing a chord slightly higher up, and somebody will be playing an open string chord, somebody will be playing a bar chord version of the same chord slightly higher up, somebody might be throwing in an extra note, an addition to that particular chord, maybe playing a little fill with a, you know, a sus4 or a sus2, something like that. So you can get these guitars all doing something slightly differently, but they all add together to give you a fuller sound that isn't just too much like just strumming the same chord from all 3 guitars. It's all a bit confusing because I said about John playing the same chord shapes that are being played, but we're using a capo, so we're 2 frets high, but he doesn't have a capo. So he's getting that sound from his guitar, and sometimes the chords sound different when he's in the same place. Let me just try and explain what I'm talking about. Maybe somebody in the comment section can explain to me what's going on, but we'll have a listen.
Well, I was born in a small town and live in a small town.
So, I mean, on John's fretboard, that is definitely a D shape, and you can see my hands are in exactly the same place as his hands are, but it should sound like a G, but it doesn't. So, and it almost looks like he's going, which is now changing the key of it. So then it gets even more interesting. There we had A minor shape, and then yeah, maybe D down to sus2. So we already know that this D shape doesn't sound like this. It sounds like this. But John's got his hand on that D shape. And there. Now the D sounds like a D and doesn't sound like a G. Obviously, I'm taking the capo out of the equation here just to make it easy to understand. But that's my problem, is how did that chord now sound like a different chord where previously it's been sounding like a G, but now it did sound like it was a D. And he's definitely playing the same D, but it sounded like a G before. So, yeah, what we've just seen is physically impossible to do. To get one chord to sound like another chord, literally, 10 or 20 seconds after you've already played that chord and it sounded like that, to now play it, and for it to sound like that is impossible. So, I mean, this is now going down a rabbit hole I didn't think I would be going down on this particular video, is trying to suss out what has gone on here. Or whether John is just, maybe his guitar isn't turned up and he's just kind of putting down shapes that look like they're chords and he's kind of singing along. Obviously he knows how to play this because it's his song. But I'm thinking, what has happened in this live performance for what we've just been seeing to sound? These are two different shapes, and further on in the performance, John plays the G like this with his thumb and first finger. Let me play it on a little bit. There we go. There's his G shape. There, so you can see, and that is now the right chord. So his guitar would be sounding right now, but the D shape that it did previously would have sounded wrong, but it didn't. We heard this, and we know in order to get this sound, this is what he does with his hands, as we can see, because this is later on in the song. But previously, to get this sound, he was doing that with his hands, which is nothing like how he plays that chord. So, yeah, really interesting to kind of dive into this. And maybe there's some kind of witchcraft going on here that I don't really understand. And the thing is, you do have a guitar called a Variax, which is something that you can change the tuning on without actually having to retune it. You can select what you want. But I don't see anything going on here where John is changing between, one tuning and the next tuning within a 10-second period, because he'd be having to do it all the time. So whether it's just the case that he was playing the wrong chords and just has his guitar off and then kind of goes back to the right chords in particular sections, I do not know. But it's certainly, I don't have the answer for that, kind of watching this now and looking at the chords that he's playing, but maybe there is an answer that I haven't figured out in this short period of time since watching the video. But it's just amazing to me that it might be the case that the guitar's off, but just that we're hearing two separate chords from the same shape. It might just be the case that we're only hearing the two guitars that are accompanying John rather than John's guitar and the sound that he's making. I'm just going to jump in again because we've got this E minor sound, and there John was playing a D again. So look at that D shape, and this is the chord. And he's playing this chord, so again, yeah, it's not quite matching up with what we're hearing. Then he went over to a kind of C add 9 maybe, which might have worked, but definitely that D shouldn't have been there.
Got nothing against a big town. Man, I'm still hayseed enough to say, look who's in the big town. My Betty's in a small town. Oh, it's good enough for me. 'Cause I was born in a small town. I could read in a small town. Dropped down in a small town. Was probably where the bury me.
And And there we have it. There's still a bit of the video to go on. I might just have a little look what happens at the end. We might continue. Let's listen on for a bit.
1, 2, 3, 4. Ooh, my baby. Oh yeah, honey. Say yeah, 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 yeah. Say yeah, yeah, yeah. Say yeah.
And there we have it. That's definitely the end of the video now. So, yeah, I do not know the answer to this. And this is the unfortunate thing when I'm doing analysis videos as a guitarist and a teacher myself. When I analyze things, obviously I'm looking at lots of different things, especially guitar playing. And when something doesn't stack up, it is difficult for me to kind of look past that because I understand, well, I think, or I struggle to understand how we're hearing what we're hearing. Anyway, back to John as a musician, artist, being hugely popular in the USA. I mean, great live performance here, even though there's kind of something that I can't figure out. But it's great that you've got an artist here who's just very much about the songs, the meaning of the songs, the lyrical content of the songs, all that kind of stuff. The things that are really rooted in traditional music and making songs for a point to make and something to say with your songs. And, you know, I get the impression that's very much what John has been about and is about. But like I said, we haven't seen a lot of John here in the UK, so not an artist that I know really well. But interesting to look at this video. And now what I'm going to do after this video is look at other live performances to see if John is playing it like this in those other performances, so that I can maybe help to understand it a little bit better. But yeah, unfortunately, looking at it this first time, it's not something that I can explain because it doesn't really make sense. I've never seen the same chord shapes sound different on two separate occasions during the same song, only seconds apart. But anyway, thank you guys for requesting this video for me to take a look at and to check out John, considering that he's not very well known here in the UK. I hope you have enjoyed this video, and if you have, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Let me know what you guys think. As always, keep those suggestions and requests coming in the comment section below, and I'll catch you guys at the next one. Rock!